Sometimes I look back at life in my village when I was a child growing up in the 80s and wonder how the violence have gone so out of control in my country. Mexico always had violence in one form or another, but over the past 10 years, it just seems to have masked out in something ugly and evil, which has in turn attracted things that are also ugly and evil. I'm a police officer in the western Michoacan state of Mexico. I've been an officer since I was 18, when I saw firsthand how badly the violence between warring cartels were affecting life and services in my community. If my superiors find out that I posted this, my police career will be over, and I will be facing criminal charges. But the public has the right to know what's out there, and realize what weapons the cartels now have at their disposal. I'm in my 30s now, and even though I'm still relatively young, I've been through a lot, and I've seen a lot. Everything from surviving a kidnapping from some sicarios, to being shot during a gunfight. On one occasion, I even saw one of my senior officers die when his car blew up after he refused to accept a bribe from the local jefe. It's a bloody job in an unforgiving country, and being on the front line as part of the Unidad de Inteligencia Narco, or the Police Narco Intelligence Unit, meant that I had to gather intelligence and monitor all things relating to the cartels from an uncomfortably close vantage point. Many times, our operations often totter on the brink of legality, as we are ordered to perform surveillance and spy on suspected narcos without a warrant. Contrary to what you might see in movies like Sicario and documentaries from Vice and Al Jazeera, foot soldiers like myself have remarkably limited technology. With the exception of our police-issued HK USB pistol, a couple shortwave radios, and a camera or two, that was it as far as equipment is concerned. Having said that, you can imagine our difficulty in gathering accurate intelligence on these assholes on a Radio Shack budget. It was dangerous work, with little chance of backup or any kind of reinforcements if caught. But besides the constant fear of being made, it was pretty boring stuff. A lot of taking pictures, looking through a pair of binoculars and taking notes, all within the confines of a small SUV or a greasy apartment. Because of budget cuts, only 2 officers at a time could be spared for any given intelligence assignment, which could take days, sometimes even weeks. So we would have to take turns sleeping. The assignment that changed it all happened less than a week after I was appointed to the unit. I was assigned to monitor the activities of a family we suspected were working with the Jalisco cartel in moving the drugs and protecting it at various stash houses in the Uruapan area. I was assigned to a more seasoned officer for this assignment. Let's call him Ernesto. He has been in the service for almost 20 years and was around to see a string of nasty executions and car bombings in the early 2000s. So, it's safe to say it took a lot to shake him. He was a large man and didn't speak much, except to give me instructions every now and again. Ernesto was a senior member of the unit, but still went on assignments like these to guide younger officers like myself. He held a lot of weight in our police department, and I really wanted to move up in law enforcement, maybe even make chief commissioner one day. So making a good first impression on this assignment was my first priority. The house we were monitoring was a lavish, white marble mansion in a rural part of the town of Tiamba, surrounded by mud huts, haciendas, and small 2-story dwellings. The house stood out like a sore thumb amidst the houses in the slums. Looking at this sprawling castle made me sick to my stomach. Thinking of all the blood and tears it took to build it, how a group of people had no problem paying for their luxuries and opulence with other people's suffering. Ernesto told me the family patriarch, Jose Aguinaldo, operated under the guise of a self-made dried goods merchant for years, and despite repeated arrests, nothing ever stuck. He lived in that mansion with his 35-year-old former beauty queen wife, Larissa, and 2 children, ages 8 and 10. There were unconfirmed reports of a grandmother also living somewhere on the premises, but no one had ever seen her. We got to Tiamba just before the sun started to set and parked our pissy SUV in one of the many winding side streets just opposite the mansion. Get the camera out the back and set it up. Sources say they received most of the goods after dark, so let's try and get something small. I did as told and set up the camera. We sat in the car about 10 meters away from the house. And for most of the night, everything seemed calm. At around 7 p.m., we saw a man in his 50s we identified as Jose, the ringleader, walking a little, frail old woman who I reasoned was his grandmother along the top balcony. He seemed to be talking to her, but we could only try and read his lips. On looking closer, we realized something off about the old woman. The skin on her face didn't seem to match the skin tone of her neck and arms. I zoomed in on the camera to see. She was wearing a traditional Aztec mask. It was weird. I tried to reason it that he knew he was being monitored by the police and didn't want her identity being revealed or perhaps known to another cartel who were very likely doing the same thing we were doing. It still didn't make sense though. If we or someone else stormed the house, we would eventually find out who Grandma was. But Ernesto told me not to think too much about it. These guys are very superstitious. They have all kinds of weird traditions and rituals they do to try to keep them safe, he said as he scrolled through his phone. Do you believe in any of that, sir? I asked. He paused before answering, as if he needed to think of some sanitized answer instead of the truth. No, that's a bunch of foolishness, he mumbled without looking at me. I thought it was strange. He had to pause before answering such a simple question. But he was a man of a few words, so I just dismissed it at that. We sat in the Hilux for about 3 more hours. I took the time to observe how quiet and deserted the streets were in this part of town. A stray dog passed right in front of us, but no other signs of light on the street, which was strange because just a few miles away there was a bustling nightlife with clubs, restaurants, and casinos. Not this part though. This area was a veritable ghost town. No sights and no sounds. Everyone tucked away in their beds. That was before the screaming began. Ernesto was asleep, but quickly awoke when it started. Is it an attack? He asked groggily, still half asleep. It doesn't seem like one. I didn't hear any gunfire or explosions. What should we do? Ernesto looked at his watch and contemplated. We didn't have the numbers or the firepower to stop an attack from a rival cartel on Aguinaldo's house. Even if we did, should we? The man was a piece of donkey shit, and Ernesto said it himself that he had been tried the legal way. Better to let the dogs take care of the dogs. But he still had innocent children inside that house. They didn't do anything to anyone. The screaming continued for about 5 more minutes, when it stopped just as abruptly as it began. Ernesto and I exchanged curious glances, wondering what to do next. We called in to the officers on the night desk, but they seemed less than excited about the incident. Maybe they were torturing someone, I said hesitantly. I looked to Ernesto for guidance, but he also seemed genuinely perplexed by the episode. Nah, they have places for things like that. Remember, these people are middlemen at best. They don't have the influence or power to do some shit like that in the same place they're stashing drugs, he said. So, what now? I asked. He looked back at his watch. It's almost midnight. If anything happens between then and now, call it in again and let me talk to them. I sat there, studying the marble structure which almost seemed to glow under the moonlight in the darkness. My mind began running on all different kind of things that could be going on in that house. Maybe they really were torturing someone. Maybe a rival cartel really did attack them. If that's the case, how come we didn't see anyone drive on or escape? Along with these theories, my mind wandered back to the old woman wearing the mask. What was her role in all of this? Was she some cocaine godmother like Griselda Blanco in Colombia? Or was she just another victim of her grandson's business? Then, it dawned on me that Aguinaldo was in his early 50s. Which meant, if that was his grandmother we saw on the balcony this evening, she would have to be in her 90s at least. I drifted off to sleep while thinking of these things, only to be shaken awake by Ernesto next to me. Before I can ask him what was wrong, I could hear the screaming again. It was shrill, almost feminine in quality, but it had an eerie pitch to it that seemed to shake the rickety SUV we were sitting in. I scanned the mansion for the source of the noise, when Ernesto pointed a single shaking finger up to the balcony. And that's when I saw one of them. It was tall, covered in pale sagging skin. At first, I thought it was the grandmother again, but looking through the night vision binoculars, I could see it wasn't. The thing, whatever it was, stood about 8 feet tall and had a broad smile across his face with large eyes and pupils and a disproportionately long neck. In another light, it might have looked like a funny caricature of someone, but it wasn't funny at all. I looked at Ernesto, and he raised his index finger to his lips as he drew his pistol. Whatever it was, it didn't see us in the shadows of the alley where we were parked. As it released another blood-curdling scream from his throat, it made me shake to my core. Just looking at this abomination made me want to pull my own eyes out. What the hell was this thing? Eventually, I saw it walk back inside the house through the doorway to the balcony, bending its long neck to fit inside. What the fuck was that? I croaked, still shaken from the ordeal. I don't know, Ernesto said shakily. This is the most scared I had ever seen him. Seeing a tough old bird like Ernesto on edge made me feel insecure. I was looking to him for security and guidance. I was about to radio in for help when I heard gunfire and explosions inside the house. "We can't sit here all night," I said. "They won't believe us. I just saw that thing for myself, and I wouldn't believe us," Ernesto replied. The screams continued, but there were human screams mixed in as well. Children's screams. Without thinking, I opened the door and darted towards the mansion's door, leaving Ernesto in the passenger side seat. In hindsight, it was a stupid decision. An inexperienced police officer, armed with a pistol, storming this house without knowing exactly what I was going to see on the other side. I shot through the fancy glass designs on the front door and kicked it in. There goes the element of surprise, I thought. Entering through the living room was like taking a step into a museum after hours. Despite the lights being off, I saw a lot of statues and masks from the pre-Columbian era, along with white statues of what I thought were Catholic saints. The furniture was totally destroyed, as the entire living room and waiting areas looked as if they had been ransacked. What the fuck was I doing? Am I really going to walk through this house trying to save a drug pusher like Aguinaldo? But he wasn't my priority. It was his children I was really concerned about. I could feel beads of sweat forming on my brow just as I heard another shrill scream from upstairs. I was hoping by now Ernesto would have been behind me, but he was still nowhere to be seen. I sighed as I walked up the spiral staircase, with pistol in hand as I walked into the second-story corridor and into hell itself. The white walls were stained red with blood as I saw the small body of a child discarded at one end, still wearing her pajamas. The shrill screams were coming from what I imagined was the master bedroom. Did I really want to see more of this? I had to do something. I turned the corner and saw the thing, looking directly at me. His eyes seemed to stab at my soul. They were yellow and looked like human eyes, but there was no humanity inside of them. Before it began grinning, I raised my own pistol and started firing at it as it charged me from one end of the corridor. Before it could reach me, I burst into what I thought was one of the children's bedrooms and locked the door behind me. There was no way I could outrun that thing. Maybe I wounded it and it would go away. I could hear its bang on the door outside and knew it would not hold for much longer. I turned to try and find another door or window to crawl out of. But that's when I saw another one. I gasped as I laid eyes on it. But this wasn't like the entity I saw in the corridor outside. This one was fat, bloated, and naked, with a bald head. He lay on the child's bed, giggling like a little girl, covered from head to toe in blood. I thought it was a man, but this thing was over 8 feet tall. Even lying down I could tell. with small eyes and a broad smile. I couldn't stand looking at it. It was so upsetting. Even lying down, I could tell it was huge, just a mass of flesh, as it licked its lips and smacked loudly. Its black, pig-like eyes met mine, as it laughed even louder and said it in an eerie, almost feminine voice.
Another one. I wasn't expecting you, but I want you to.
As it grunted, trying to get up on its feet, I quickly ran past it and threw myself outside the window and onto the roof. I felt pain stabbing through my forehead and face as shards of broken glass dug deep into my flesh. What was I thinking? I wasn't thinking. I just wanted to be far away from those demons. Before I could gather my hand, a long, red, chubby hand stretched out of the broken window and swiped for me as I darted back and fell off the roof on my back. More pain shot through my body as I lay on my back, unable to move. I felt something dragging me away as I slipped in and out of consciousness. I looked up and saw Ernesto, pulling me back in towards the shadows of the alley we were hiding in. I tried to form words to explain what I saw, but Ernesto only shook his head from side to side and mouthed the words, "Be quiet." He shoved me into the passenger side of the SUV as he drove me away. Before passing out from the pain, I remember looking back at the house to see the mansion explode. I woke up a few days later at a military hospital a few miles south. No sooner had I wake up, I was confronted on members of our intelligence gathering department who sat and transcribed everything I had witnessed and experienced from beginning to end. I was also visited by senior officers from our military intelligence unit and asked to sign documents restricting me from discussing any of the events experienced. I was never given a full idea of what I saw exactly. At least, not until Ernesto came to visit me a few days later. I saw in the news the explosion at the house was blamed on the work of a rival cartel. But he explained he called in an airstrike. Despite the shortcomings of our unit, we did maintain close communication with our air guard and said they dispatched the drone less than 30 minutes after he made the call. The fat man and the giraffe were both cooked. What? I replied. That's what the top level people are calling them. We don't really know what they are. The bodies were taken away by a branch of the government I had never seen before. So, they weren't demons? I asked. I don't know. All I know is they were all burnt up when backup finally got here. I don't think I'm even supposed to be telling you this right now. But you risked your life for those children. You deserve to know what you were up against. He said hoarsely. That's when I remembered. Whatever happened to the children? He paused for a while again, before answering. Both killed, but not by the airstrike. According to forensics, they were killed before that. Parts of them are still missing. Jose, his wife, grandmother, all of them were found chewed up in this big heap of flesh in one of the rooms. It was awful. Laying in that hospital bed, I realized my questions only led to more questions. What the hell were those things? I've been hearing about things like those when I was younger, Ernesto said, breaking the silence. Since I was a child, I heard about them. Lesser gods the Aztecs used to worship. I heard they were real and lived in the plains and deserts. But I never saw one. Not until that night. I couldn't believe anything he was saying. But then again, what was the alternative? What other spin was there to this entire incident? I could only sigh. I think the violence and the carnage going on is drawing them back out. They can smell it wherever they are hiding and coming out in the open. So what now? As if the cartels weren't bad enough, we now have to deal with these things? I asked. He studied my face before speaking. What now is, you get better, and we go out to fight again. Whoever, whatever